we're going to review with you the state plan, the comments we got back from all of you around the state plan. So Nikki here is going to be moving the slides along, so thank you. So my name is Jackie Orr. I am the director of the Division of Community Services. I'm going to be one of the presenters today, along with two other folks. So I'll have them introduce themselves now.
Hi, I'm Nancy Foll. I'm going to be reviewing the Tripartite Board compliance and guidance, and I'll pass it on to Nikki.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nikki Battistoni, and I'll be reviewing the comments received through the state plan. And I'll pass it back to Jackie.
All right, great. Thank you both. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started, that we will send the slides to all of you who are on the webinar after it's over so that you will have these. We will have time for questions at the end of each section. So since we're talking about three distinct topics, we'll pause and you'll be able to either chat in your question, and I believe you can unmute yourself as well. So please, if you have any questions, let us know. And then, of course, at the end of today's webinar, we will send you a link for you to evaluate and give us feedback on how well we did today, and if there's anything that you wanted that you didn't get from us regarding these topics. So with that, we're going to start with the Tripartite Board compliance document, and I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
Okay, good morning once again. The memo that we are referring to was distributed to the network. It was made available as part of the link when you registered, and it was also available for download with the registration confirmation. I have also been informed that the memo will be included on our website and in the SharePoint portal for subrecipient forms. Okay, Nikki, if you can move on. The memo is guidance that is intended to communicate DOS's interpretation of the existing CSBG Act regarding tripartite board composition. We aim to help the eligible entities fulfill the goals of CSBG, and we want the eligible entities to know that they have the flexibility to create their own processes and implementation methods as long as they are reasonable and appropriate. Next slide. I'm going to be reading some of the excerpts from the memo directly because they are key points that we need to emphasize for you to understand. The CSBG Act specifically states that the entity shall administer the CSBG program through a tripartite board that fully participates in the development, planning, implementation, and evaluation of the program to serve low-income communities. The composition of a tripartite board consists of 1/3 of the members are elected public officials, their representatives, or appointed public officials, and we commonly refer to this as the public sector. Not fewer than 1/3, or at least 1/3 of the members are representatives of low-income individuals and families in the communities served, commonly referred to as the low-income sector. And then finally, the remainder of the members are officials or members of business, industry, labor, religious, law enforcement, education, or other major groups and interests in the community served. And we commonly refer to this as the private sector. Some eligible entities may have different names for each one of these sectors. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward. Thank you, Nikki. The CSBG Act and New York State requirements for a tripartite board composition is the members of the board shall be selected by the entity. The organization itself must select the directors to serve on the board. This is why we need to see the appointments in the board minutes. Eligible entities should maintain current documentation to support tripartite composition of the board of directors for our review. In New York State, a board must have a minimum of 3 directors. The number of directors serving on a tripartite board does not need to be evenly divisible by 3. If the board is not evenly divisible by 3, then compliance with tripartite proportionality is determined by rounding up. And when we say rounding up, we mean we're going to round up to a number that is divisible by 3. Okay? Example, a board with 8 directors must have 3 public officials, at least 3 representatives of the low-income community, and the remainder can be the private sector. You can see for the public sector and the low-income sector, we're moving that number up to 9. So they each would have 3 in those sectors, at least 3 in the low income. Nikki, if you can move on to the next. Okay. Sector documentation. This is documentation that DOS needs to see to show compliance with the legislation. Thank you, Nikki. The legislation states 1/3 of the members of the board are elected public officials holding office on the date of selection or the representatives, except that if the number of such elected officials reasonably available and willing to serve on the board is less than 1/3 of the membership of the board, membership on the board of appointed public officials or their representatives may be counting and meeting such 1/3 requirement. Basically, it's saying if you cannot identify elected public officials who are reasonably willing and able to serve, that you can go to appointed public officials as a candidate for your board. DOS would like to see documentation that shows the following. The public official is holding elected or appointed office at the time of appointment. If a public official appoints a representative, documentation is needed to show the public official is in the office at the time of appointing a representative, and a dated letter from the public official naming the representative is available for our review. And we recommend that it's official letterhead from the public official's office. If an appointed public official is selected, documentation should be provided to show what efforts were made to first find public officials to serve on the board. DOS will ask. We will ask you what public officials you initially approached before going to the appointed public official. Okay, and as I noted before, we need to see that the candidate was selected by the entity, so we need to see the board minutes to reflect board approved the selection of the candidate. And then finally, this one is not in the memo, but it is in New York State nonprofit law, that a copy of the conflict of interest statement signed prior to board appointment. That is the case in all nonprofit boards. Nikki, if you can move on. Okay. And going to the low income sector, and this is for private entities, not fewer than 1/3 of the members are persons chosen in accordance with democratic selection procedures adequate to assure that these members are representative of low-income individuals and families in the neighborhood served. And each representative of low-income individuals and families selected to represent a specific neighborhood within a community under the first clause resides in the neighborhood represented by the member. Okay, so the documentation that DOS would need to look at you would need to show us that the democratic selection process that you have in place was followed. And you would provide us with copies of whether you require the dated, we need to see the dated ballots, signature vote forms, public meeting announcements, attendance records of those who attended that meeting, anything that can show that you followed your process. Okay. And if specified in the bylaws, we need to see proof of residency in the neighborhood served. Some boards and some agencies serve dual counties. They require that certain members reside in the secondary or third counties or reside in a specific area within their region, whether it's in a specific city or north-south region of a county. We need to see, and we can typically look at just their address to determine that. Then again, we need to see the board minutes to reflect board approved selection of the candidate to show that they were selected by the entity. And then finally, a copy of the conflict of interest statement signed prior to board appointment. Okay, Nikki, thank you. For the public sector, this is almost identical to the private sector, except the residency requirement is emphasized with the legislative language. The legislation states a tripartite board which shall have members selected by the organization or the board shall be composed so as to assure that not fewer than 1/3 of the members are persons chosen in accordance with democratic selection procedures adequate to assure these members are A, representative of low-income individuals and families in the neighborhood served, they reside in the neighborhood served, and are able to participate actively in the development, planning, implementation, and evaluation of programs. So the documentation that we will look for here, again, is to show that the democratic selection process was followed in selecting this candidate. And the agency or the board can show us that by providing copies of dated ballots, signature vote forms, public meeting announcements, attendance records, etc. Again, documentation to show that your process was followed. Proof of residency in the neighborhood served. That may be the county they reside in or the borough they reside in. Board minutes to reflect board approved selection of candidate, again, selected by the entity. And then finally, a copy of the conflict of interest statement or whatever equivalent is for that government entity prior to board appointment. Okay. Nikki, did I see a question come up in the chat?
Yes, there's a question asking to define appointed public official. For example, what would include the deputy county executive or deputy mayor who are appointed by the county executive and mayor respectively, but do not fill elected positions?
Those are great titles right there. It could also be the commissioner of DSS we see commonly. I would assure that if you are asking the deputy that there is not a conflict with the executive director of the county, if that's the title. But you know your regional politics better than we do. Okay. Moving on to private sector documentation, and this applies both to private and public entities. Also known as representative of major groups and interests in the community. This is the phrasing that's in the CSBG Act. The remainder of the members are officials or members, and we've stated this before, of business, industry, labor, religious, law enforcement, education, or other major groups and interests in the community. This is a pretty broad, this is a pretty easy area to provide documentation for. It's very broad. The agency, the board itself, identifies what major groups or interests they want represented on their board. So with any candidate that's selected, we will need to see documentation to show which specific group or interest the candidate represents. You can provide us with copies of a dated letter from the group or interest, or a business card if this is someone in banking or finance, their resume, education, certificates, anything that supports the area that they're representing on your board. Okay. And again, we want to see board minutes to reflect board approved selection of the candidate, again, showing selected by the entity. And then finally, a copy of the conflict of interest statement prior to board appointment. I see a couple other questions.
Yeah, there's actually just one. Commissioner of DSS qualifies for public sector. And that's the question.
The commissioner of DSS in most counties is not an elected office. It is typically an appointed individual. And you, after you have gone to other elected officials and they're not able to serve or they're not responding in the time frame that you have, you are welcome to go to appointed officials, including the commissioner of DSS or whatever similar title your county may have, to see if they are eligible to serve on your board. Did that help? Okay. All right. When DSS is monitoring, these are aspects of monitoring that CSBG staff and DOS do. We are going to be looking for board vacancies primarily. And the first one in the memo states that eligible entities shall notify DOS within 10 days of a lack of compliance with tripartite board requirements, basically a board vacancy. So if you are aware of a board vacancy, a board member resigns, you really want to reach out to your program analyst within 10 business days and let them know, okay? In addition to the notification, DOS, we monitor the eligible entities' board minutes and we attend board meetings. We also look at the fiscal and program quarterly attestation, governance question number 1, to see if anyone has left the board, if anyone's been added to the board within the last quarter. Okay, and finally, we also look at the board composition as part of the across and the tracks. Okay, and here's some good practices that we recommend to include within your board minutes. Date and time of the meeting. I personally recommend that the agencies I work with add a footnote. These are the board minutes. This is the date of the meeting in every one of their board minute pages, so that if they need to separate the page, let's say the board approved the strategic plan, you can take that page out and put it into the across of the tracks. But it is helpful to have the date and time of the meeting included in your board minutes, along with all directors and guests who were in attendance. You want to include documentation possibly that a quorum was achieved. Some agencies rely on a quorum tracker. This is an easy way to just look at the minutes and determine right on the spot that yes, quorum was achieved for this meeting. And you definitely want to note actions taken by the board. You want to make sure that you're recording all those activities that the board is doing simply, and we'll cover it in the last bullet here. You also want to show documentation of all elections and or appointments of directors. Remember, the legislation requires that board members are selected by the entity, so this is why you really want to make sure you're documenting it thoroughly. And as an other little good practice, I would list those board members individually that they were appointed to the board. And then finally, to document compliance with CSBG organizational standards, board meeting minutes should document the actions of the board and list any reports presented to the board. And just as a little on-site hint, you might want to look at the language of the organizational standard and make sure that the board has mirrored that action. So if it says the board reviewed and approved, that's what your meeting minutes will say. The board reviewed a document, that's what your minutes will say. And that is very helpful in moving forward so that everything is clearly documented. Okay, with all that said, any other questions? And raise your hand, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat either at this time, Nancy.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nancy. All right, so I'm going to talk about observations and findings. All right, so we're really going to talk about observations since we're talking about the tripartite board. We're going to talk about observations regarding the tripartite board, and even when we get into the finding form, I'll focus more on that as well. So the memo that Nancy was referring to, it recognizes that we know that you need time to recruit and see eligible board members. So we will treat noncompliance related to the tripartite board structure as an observation for the first 90 days following a vacancy, which then gives you time to regain compliance. My understanding is that's the way that it has been done in the past. And now I guess maybe I should say we're formalizing it more, so that what we'll do is we will notify you via email that an observation has been issued and why. And we will identify, the public sector, the low income sector, so which you will already be aware, but then we'll put that in writing. And then we'll ask you for a plan that you have to fill the vacancy. We will provide any technical assistance that you might need from us during that observation time and following. And then we'll monitor the vacancy until filled. So with 90 days, you could expect to be hearing from your program analyst about once a month, just checking in, asking you if you need any assistance from us. And then whatever it is that we can help you with, we will. As you already are aware, or will be, if the tripartite compliance is not achieved within 90 days, then that's when the observation will become a finding. Okay, for those of you who are at the regional meetings, you got a very brief overview of the finding form. So this is a new process. There's actually 3 parts of the finding form, and I'll be walking through all those 3 sections. And we can move to the next slide. Okay, so why? Your first question is, why do we have to have a finding form? And that's because before I got here a few years ago, OCS came and monitored the state. And one of the things they mentioned to us, which was not a finding, but it was a strong recommendation, is that we create a process to be able to better track findings. So they had a problem seeing, excuse me, when and a finding was identified, and then the process to resolve it, and then the actual resolving of the finding. So therefore, we, fiscal, program, us here, and legal worked together, and we created this finding report form. A couple of you have already seen it. Some of you may never, ever see it. But we'll walk through it, like I said, and so if you get it, you won't have as many questions about it. So you can see that first quote is from our program and fiscal monitoring process and guidelines, which says that findings are minor or short-term violations of laws, regulations, cost principles, contracts, state plans, or policies. We started using this finding form on May 1st, so that was just a few months ago. And, so it's been May, June, July, August, so about 4 months that we've been using it so far. Internally, it's going well. If those of you have got it, you can share with us how it's been working for you. Again, if you fail to maintain tripartite composition, and that's a violation of the CSBG Act, and failure to resolve a finding could result in a notice of deficiency. Okay, so we'll walk through the form. So step 1 is the description of the finding. So we will describe what it is. It could be something other than a tripartite board compliance, but if it's a tripartite board compliance, then we'll say, there's a tripartite compliance issue, and that you need to fill the low income vacancy. We will reference the law, the regulation, cost principle, contract, or state plan or policy that goes along with that finding. A corrective action is required, so we will fill in, again, for tripartite board, it would be you need to fill that vacancy in whatever sector. The date the finding is identified by DOS. In a tripartite board situation, since we just both talked about that an observation is for 90 days, then the date the finding is identified would be the day following that 90 days if it hasn't been resolved. And for another finding, it would be whatever it was identified, the date that the finding was identified by us. and then the date the finding is to be resolved. Now then we would not just pull a date out of thin air. We would work with you to, determine a date, especially around anything, but for a tripartite board, we would talk to you and see what is a reasonable date that you are going to be able to, that you think you're going to be able to fill, say, that low income vacancy on your board. You have someone in mind, you're doing recruitment, you're having a board meeting in 60 days, and that's the date that we put in. As you can see, it goes through a process here with signatures. You also, and dates, and you'll also see that there's a fiscal rep. So the fiscal office is also using the finding form. So potentially you could get a finding related to something that's fiscal related, and then you would get that from your fiscal analyst signed by the fiscal director. Now, step 2 is an extension if necessary, if you need a time extension. So in this case, you as the community action agency would fill out this part, and then you would send it to us. So in step 1, which I forgot to tell you, after we fill out step 1, you get via email the finding form. So you would see all that information, and you would see the rest of the form at that point blank. So then if you say, oh, 60 days is coming, I'm not going to be able to fill that vacancy, then you would take the form, you'd fill it out, and you would tell us the steps you've taken. You're recruiting someone, you thought that person would be able to fill the position, something unforeseen happened, and so therefore you have to go back to the drawing board or go back to maybe someone else that you were thinking about recruiting. So those are the steps you're taking. You're going to give us a brief explanation as to why the time extension is needed. In this case, again, you have to go back to someone else, which is going to require more time. Then the date in which finding will be corrected. You decide what date that's going to be. Again, working with your program analyst, something that we all agree that is reasonable period of time, and then it gets signed by you as the executive director or CEO, and then it gets signed by your board chairperson and dated. And then it comes to us, and we accept it or not accept it. And then I'm the person who signs it, and then I date it. So far, we've only been using the form since May, like I said. So we've had maybe 3 or 4, I think, finding forms, and all related to tripartite board. And there's one that has requested an extension. And of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but yes, I accepted it because it was, reasonable, and the agency needed more time. So it was accepted, and then it was signed and sent back to the Community Action Agency. And then let's go on to, so then step 3 is the resolution of the finding. So this is to, kind of do what OCS was requesting us to kind of close that circle. So the brief description of the completed corrective action. So that's now, so say you were out of board compliance. We filled out the finding form, you requested an extension, the extension was approved, and now your board is fully compliant. So we would just say in this case that the board is now fully compliant, the date in which the finding was resolved, and then any DOS follow-up. So that would really depend on what the finding was. For a tripartite board compliance finding, our follow-up is just going to be, our typical monitoring and site visits and reviewing, the attestation and all those things that Nancy was talking about. So probably wouldn't be any different, you wouldn't see anything necessarily different there. And then again, it goes through our internal process and then gets signed and dated. And then it does get sent back to you at the Community Action Agency. And so then this way you have it that, excuse me, shows when the finding was identified, if there was any extension, and now it's closed, And so it closed the loop, it closes it for you and also closes it for us. So the next time that OCS comes and does a monitoring visit, we will be able, provided they ask these questions, then we will be able to go through and show them our, new finding form, and they would be able to track all the findings, be it tripartite board compliance or any other finding we had. Okay, so were there any questions? I wasn't paying attention.
There were some questions in the chat, but Nancy was able to answer the questions.
Oh, good. Okay, if a board vacancy occurs and an individual is being recruited immediately and would not be appointed within 10 days, we still need to report this to monitor, and we would still receive this finding form. Well, it depends, Leslie, on whether we've observed it, right? So if we've noted it as an observation, am I right about that, Nancy?
Well, we would want the agency to communicate with the program analyst.
Yes.
And, and we don't want to go through something if we can avoid it. So talk to us. We talk to Jackie, we'll make a decision with your input. I don't want to say to wait until we find it. We really do appreciate it when the agencies communicate with us right away. We'll work with you, and we have worked with our agencies.
Yes.
But
yes.
There are situations that we have to address because of requirements at a federal level. So if you want to take it from there, Jackie.
No, I agree with everything you said, and and it is, we have to do what we have to do, but I also we are not in any position in, beyond our need to do what we need to do and follow all the policies and guidelines that you are very well aware of. We don't want to make life any more difficult to you than it has to be. And someone once said to me when I was at NISCA that, maintaining a tripartite board is time and resource intensive. And I am well aware of that. So that's the reason for the 90-day observation, because we realize it was actually suggested years ago at one or in other states that as soon as someone's like you have a board meeting at 4:01, someone resigns, and then that automatically becomes a finding. I mean, that doesn't seem to make sense for neither you nor us. So going back to your question, Leslie, we consider, once we've identified it as a vacancy, then we give you that 90-day observation period to fill. And then if that 90-day observation period is gone, then yes, at that point it becomes a finding. But going back to what Nancy said, we want to be aware of any vacancies that are on your board so that we can, either assist you in any way we can, or that, at the very least, that we are aware of any vacancies that are happening. Does that make sense, Nancy, to you? I don't want to speak out of turn.
Oh, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep, and so we have one hand raised, Scott
Okay.
Mathis. So Scott, did you want to ask your question?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. On this 10-day thing with the resignation, if this was a employee leaving a place, they give a notice. Their vacancy doesn't exist until they actually leave. So if a board member gives notice that they're going to resign, and we have the board accept that resignation at the next board meeting, when's the 10-day start? Because often if somebody's going to resign and they let me know they're going to resign in September, we can have the next person ready to roll and appoint them at the same meeting that we accept the resignation. So can the 10-day start after the board accepts said resignation?
Nancy wants to answer that. I can see her raising her hand.
I can hear all those that have had to recruit board candidates saying that, Scott, that would be the dream scenario, to have advance notice that a board member is going to leave, giving you time to find a replacement. But in the scenario that you shared with us, we would not count the vacancy until it became vacant, until the effective date of that vacancy. And if you happen to have someone at that same board meeting who's willing to fill that vacancy, kudos to your board. But that would be the ideal scenario, although that is not what DOS expects of all our boards. We know that's a heavy lift for some agencies, and you're very fortunate if you're able to identify a candidate before a vacancy occurs. But I hope that answered your question, Scott.
It looks like it did.
Okay,
And
I see it.
there's another question. If a board meets, I think 10 months per year, are vacancies still counted when the board does not meet for the other 2 months?
Yes, I was trying to answer that. The vacancy, when the vacancy is identified, that's when we start tracking it for the 90-day observation. If the board has a gap in meetings, that is an optimal time for you to start recruiting a candidate for the very next board meeting. Many of our boards do break for the summer. They do have executive committee meetings. However, we do want to see the full board appoint candidates. So we have also had boards add the option that they can do an electronic election during those gap months, if needed, to bring on an additional board member. So keep that in mind. But again, we do count the vacancy from the time it is identified. Whether or not there's a break in the summer has no impact on the time frame. I hope that answered your question, Melinda.
Yeah, Melinda just said,
Yeah.
yes, it did. Okay.
Good.
So I think if you have any other questions, you could put them in the chat, and now we'll move on to the state plan comments.
Yep. So I'm going to review state plan comments that were received during our comment period. I'll go over the positive and strengths, and then the areas of opportunity, and the DOS response to those comments. Just keep in mind that these are a summary of the comments. Some of the comments were the same across the board, so we just condensed what we received. So first comment, support the current state payment structure. Our eligible entities appreciate the 25% advance, and then award the remaining funds when the expenditure milestones are met. Our network would like to continue to see the partnership with NISCA, commitment to promote state linkages within the state and local efforts to address poverty. Faith-based organizations are able to submit proposals for CSBG discretionary funding. Support the provision that DOS will implement the highest allowable CSBG income eligibility level, which is currently set at 200% of the poverty guidelines. Administer CSBG funds that allow creative programming to serve low-income communities. Support the decision to remove MWBE initiative from the CSBG contracts. Support the efforts of DOS to include eligible entities in the development of the plan, and encourage DOS to continue its efforts to solicit meaningful feedback on a regular basis from the grantees. Additional comments, additional positive comments and strengths. DOS staff have been supportive and offered guidance and joined key events. Assigned program analysts, there's thorough follow-up and tracking that allows CAA staff to focus on strategic improvements and results. The 26-27 monitoring guide reflects thoughtful evolution of process. The implementation of the statewide document portal focuses on the reduction of redundant requests and proactive documentation tracking, appreciates DOS ongoing efforts to make the monitoring process more thoughtful and supportive, the use of the risk assessment, annual and triennial assessment scores, and individual monitoring plan allows for a balanced, targeted approach, ensuring that oversight is responsive to actual needs, and appreciates the internal efforts that DOS has made, such as using SharePoint and reviewing and advancing documents through the contracting process, and ensures that the state continues exploring methods to further modernize such efforts. So those were all the positive or the strengths. And then some of the opportunities or recommendations that we received: encourage DOS to engage other state offices such as OTDA, OCFS, HCR, DOH, and others to work through DOS to facilitate the local CAAs. Elaborate on what additional language would be added to the CSBG discretionary RFPs to encourage faith-based participation. Recommends DOS explore standing regional stakeholder work groups composed of agency leader and program staff. Unable to make any comments regarding the state triennial assessment review or the STAR to replace the tracks because the STAR has not yet been made available. Too many priorities listed for discretionary funding. These items should be prioritized to minimize impact. Recommend the review of the CSBG state plan semi-annually at the CSBG advisory council meetings to ensure processes and goals are being met. And then no recollection of the discussion of CAAs have to fill a board vacancy within 90 days or issued a finding. Managing the tripartite board structure is complicated and time consuming. So again, those are the opportunities and recommendations that we received. And so DOS made some updates in the state plan after receiving the comments, and these were some of the responses and updates. So DOS is committed to developing partnership and linkages with other state offices and stakeholders. Efforts to connect and schedule meetings with other state offices and potential stakeholders will be tracked and shared with the network. Language updated in 9.6 of the state plan to elaborate on what additional language to encourage faith-based participation meant. So the updated language reflects the state will work to strengthen the relationship between faith-based community organizations and statewide network through language specific to initiatives that will engage participation in future requests for applications. DOS will work in partnership with NISCA to explore holding regional stakeholder meetings or planning forums, possibly engaging the economic development centers, reaffirming through messaging that the use of CSBG discretionary funds is left broad and to be as flexible as possible to allow innovative ways to meet the needs of the CAAs and local communities. DOS commits to the CSBG advisory council meeting at a minimum twice a year, and DOS will share progress on the plan with the advisory council. Additionally, DOS acknowledges that managing the tripartite board structure is complicated. However, it's required by CSBG Act. DOS will provide technical assistance and training to the network, which everyone received today, and review efforts to track non-compliance, discuss the approval of extensions and flexibilities of the state office. We also updated language in 6.3A and 10.14 of the state plan regarding the state triennial review section of the monitoring guide. And so in the state plan, again, 6.3A and 10.14, you'll see it will say DOS is in development phase of a new triennial assessment. The STAR tool is intended to thoughtfully reduce the redundancies of the monitoring and provide a comprehensive, balanced, and responsive approach to oversight. The transition to the STAR tool is planned for FY27. and intends to replace the current tracks tool once finalized and approved for use. DOS plans to release the STAR document prior to implementation for feedback and comment evaluation from the network. This transition process is further referenced in the 26-27 DOS monitoring guide on page 12. And then in the monitoring guide, there is a portion in there that says the transition to the STAR tool is planned for FY27 and intends to replace the current tracks tool once finalized and approved for use. DOS plans to release the STAR document prior to implementation for feedback and comment from the network. Are there any questions on the state plan comments, positives, strengths, opportunities, or DOS's responses? At this time, I don't see any questions in the chat. No one has their hand raised. So Jackie, I'll turn it over to you for any closing remarks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nikki. And I do want to thank all of you for your comments to the state plan. It is really valuable for us to get your feedback and to make changes. And I mean, the positives are really good to hear, and some of it aligns. So we were really happy about that. But knowing where we can improve and what we can do is where we want to focus, as well as continuing to do the good things for all of you. So we appreciate your time. We are now at the end of this month. It's due to OCS, so we will be uploading it next week. And then we'll be meeting with OCS after they review it for if they have any further comments or questions for us. But we are happy that the process is over and that we'll be doing another state plan in another 2 years. So we get a little bit of a break there. And that's it for us today. If you have any questions, please let us know. As I said, we'll be sending out an evaluation, so give us your feedback. I also wanted to let you all know that some of us, hopefully as many of us as possible, will be at the upcoming NISCA conference, and we will be doing 3 sessions. We'll be doing one on updates of what's been happening here. We will talk a little bit more about the STAR tool, because I know that it has been a long time in coming. So we'll give you some further updates about that and other work that's been happening. Jessica Lowell and I are also going to be doing a session just about highlighting Roma for new folks. And then also we're going to be doing a data dive session, which will be sharing some information from the CSBG annual report with all of you and looking for your feedback of that data and what other data you'd like to see coming from the state office. So we are excited about those 3 sessions that we'll be doing there. So again, questions, we are always, when will the full topic agenda be released for the conference? Scott, I don't know that yet. The only thing I've seen is what's on their website. I'm assuming hopefully soon. But those are the 3 topics we're going to do. And actually, thank you, Scott, for your question, because there's something else I wanted to share. We were able to reach out to NASCASP, and NISCA was gracious enough to be able to fit it into their schedule. So someone from NASCASP is coming and talking about the new CSBG annual report, which they're calling 3.0. Right now we're in 2.1. So 3.0 is going to be coming in 27, I believe. So that we will, I see Tim responded, check the website for updates. Okay, thank you, Tim. So yes, so NISCA was gracious enough to be able to allow Tiffany from NASCAS to do a couple sessions about the CSBG annual report 3.0 to get us all ready and all prepared and thinking about what's coming and kind of comparing the NPIs and the services from 2.1, the one we're using now, to 3.0 and the similarities and the differences. So I think you'll really appreciate that. So with that said, I'll let you get back 10 minutes of your day, and thank you very much. And we're here for any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.